It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome back to another Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. And it's a Friday, so we got DB with us. I feel like we got to have Brandon Ross. I make a special voiceover that includes Derrick just for Fridays. I don't know. What do you think, Alan?
I'm in. Love to get Brandon to come back on the show and then do it.
Yeah, how we doing, DB?
Doing good, man. Not much to kind of speak of in Steelers land, I feel like, in the last couple of weeks. Been pretty quiet on that front, but we got the All-Star circuit coming up. Shrine Bowl gets kicked off really this weekend. We got the Senior Bowl next week, so a lot of NFL draft stuff to talk about, to kind of dive into. So that's really where my focus has been, lately, but I'm excited about that.
I figured we could start talking about all the staff coaching changes that the Steelers have made. All right, now that we're done with that, you mentioned the Shrine Bowl within there. I know that Alan said that he wanted to talk about it as well. So that's actually where we could start out. If there was something about the Shrine Bowl you wanted to mention, I just had to get that joke off real quick.
Yes, it was a pretty good one. Yeah, I mean, I wrote something for the site today that you guys can go check out. It's just basically like quick write-ups of like 5 prospects, just kind of keep an eye on as the Shrine Bowl gets kicked off. But, over the last couple of years, the Shrine Bowl's kind of, I feel like, closed the gap a little bit between them and the Senior Bowl. It's like, they're firmly in like the second highest tier of like all-star circuit. There's always, some good players there. They've had some first-round picks. I think they could have at least one first-round pick again this year, worth paying attention to. And Kenneth Grant from Michigan, he was somebody that I think, Steelers fans will probably be pretty amped up to watch over the next couple of days. You'll probably start seeing a lot of social media stuff.
They got at least 2.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Shador as well. So yeah, I mean they're going to have some.
Kenneth Grant
really good players.
yesterday. 2 days ago.
What'd you say?
Well, Kenneth Grant got brought up on this podcast this week.
Oh, okay.
Actually, so
yeah,
I love Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, Grant's a very interesting player, man, because like you look at the way he's built, and I think you would see like the 339 pounds. He arrived at Michigan, I think, over 360. So there's been some, he's dropped a little bit of weight, but like when you watch him play, like doesn't play anything like you'd expect. Like you'd expect him to be this like 2-gap nose plugger in the middle, takes on double teams, anchors in, and like he's anything but that. Like he, wins with a pretty quick first step. He has a really nice swim move. He was pulling out spin move counters and everything, like rushing the passer this year. So he's really added a lot to his game. I felt like it was a little bit more consistent this year, maybe more so than even the production would really add on. But he's a good player, man. I think maybe potentially overshadowed by the fact that, he's playing next to a top 5 pick in Mason Graham. But Grant's a really nice player, and there's a number of other players that I shouted out on that list. That'll probably be, maybe some guys that you've heard of, some guys that you haven't. But I think some players that potentially would have some Steeler interest too make a lot of sense.
Alan, any thought? I know that you mentioned you liked a couple of the players that Derrick wrote about in that article.
Yeah, I also really like Kenneth Graham, and I think we talked about him a little bit. But the other one that I really have been a fan of for a while now was Ja'Cory Brooks. Was a transfer from Alabama to Louisville, played just 1 season at Louisville, but I think is a really, really dynamic athlete. Maybe he doesn't have like the world's most consistent hands, but he gets open. He makes big plays. Good yak guy. I think if you're talking about a mid-round receiver, either the Steelers get a guy in free agency and they feel like they can wait until later rounds to address wide receiver, or if they're going to double dip, I think he's definitely a guy that's really interesting.
Probably the only guy that they take. So
yeah, just one more thing about Brooks is, Brooks is a really interesting player because, he kind of got some playing time early on at Alabama, played with Bryce Young. One of the things I really liked about his game is like he's really good in the scramble drill. Seems like really, a small part of being a receiver. But, when he was working with Bryce, that was always like, he showed up in those big moments for him when he got outside the pocket. And even Louisville's quarterback is somebody that I really like as well. It's rather unfortunate that he's like a 26-year-old rookie prospect. He's kind of older, been in college a while because of his injury history. But him and Tyler Shough this year had a lot of moments, like really impressive plays out of structure. Brooks does a really good job, like getting his eyes back to the quarterback, making sure he's making himself available, works back to the football well. Like you mentioned, like can create some explosive plays, man. Like he's an ex receiver. He plays on the outside. He's like 6'1", I think 190. So he has a release package. He's a pretty solid route runner. He's not like, he's not like a snappy route runner, but he's more fluid than anything else. But like you mentioned now, like he gets open. It's just the hands really are the biggest question for me. So I'm interested to see like how he does against some of the corners that they got at the Shrine Bowl. There's a couple guys there that I think are pretty solid players and should create some fun one-on-ones to watch the film on.
Question for both of you. Tyler Shuck's the example here, but just a general question as it relates to the age at that position in general. That's often used as a negative when they are an older prospect, and I get why and everything like that. And I certainly see the case if you're talking about a guy that you are hoping to be like the franchise guy. But if you're talking about, a backup quarterback that you just hope is kind of like a long-term backup quarterback, just like a good guy to have in the room, couldn't that be a benefit too, especially when it's a guy that's been around for so long and played in so many different systems like a Tyler Shuck?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you talk about age as a detracting factor from a prospect, it mostly only factors in when you're talking about guys who for that rookie contract, you want it to be a significant benefit. So you're talking about like, offensive linemen where you want to be able to sign this guy to a second contract and have him for 10 years. Like if you're talking about drafting a guy anywhere after the 4th round where ceiling is basically backup anyway, you're not talking about spending big money on a future contract anyway. I really think age kind of, I don't want to say it totally goes out the window, but I think starting with day 3, I don't really think it matters that much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think as it relates to Shuck and just like the quarterback position in general, I think not necessarily has to do with him, but I do think experience in a way is going to start to kind of become more in vogue again at the quarterback position. And we can kind of segue this to talk about Jaden Daniels because I think this is something that y'all wanted to talk about. But I don't necessarily think it's a coincidence that Daniels haven't started as many games as he did in college at Arizona State and then moved to LSU. I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that experience like really helped him through his rookie season. Now, obviously, this is a completely unprecedented situation, but I do think with the way that the NFL is, like the NFL is not a developmental league. So like you need to have your kind of ish together before you get to the league. And it's really on you for your own development. And I just think like the more games that you've played, being acclimated to different systems is definitely a good thing and can kind of help that developmental curve. With Shuck, it's kind of interesting because like he was teammates with Justin Herbert. Like he's been around a long time. But I think with him specifically this year, it's just the first time that we've been able to see him like get through a season without being hurt. So I think when you're talking about age, most of the time with prospects, whether it's good or bad, like I do kind of like in my grading scale, I do ding guys for like being over like usually like 24-year-old rookies and above. And then I give players a little bit of a bump if they're like 21 and younger, just because it's really about like where you're on your developmental path. So like how much more upside, how much more do you have to grow? With Shuck, he's kind of a unique kind of player in that because like we don't have enough film on him to really say like, is he tapped out? Like, could he get better? Like, I mean, this is really his like first year being a full-time starter. So he's an interesting player, but I think like when this class does have some day 3 guys to take a look at that I think are kind of interesting that I think will actually go in day 3. Like Shuck's a guy who I think has enough talent to where he could like, be a high quality backup at the next level. I think Max Brosmer, who was a guy I mentioned in the Shambo article from Minnesota, definitely a different player, but like also somebody who could be a quality backup. And I know that's not going to get like fans like super jazzed up or anything like that, but the Steelers don't have a quarterback on the roster right now. So even if they do bring back, say it's Justin Fields, we're not counting Skylar Thompson. Yeah,
Skylar Thompson.
But even if they bring back Justin Fields or Russell Wilson or whatever, like they're gonna have to find like a couple of these other quarterbacks somewhere. So like a day 3 quarterback as like a backup is like, is not the worst thing in the world, or it's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think with the experience thing, like I mean, look at Bo Nix. Like he was a long time college quarterback too. I think just teams have less patience for development than they used to. You see like a guy drafted in the first round, and very rarely are teams willing to let him learn and grow and develop. And so I think as a quarterback position, I agree. I think you're going to see teams maybe penalize guys less for being older, especially like things are going to have to change. Like the NIL has made the formula different. Like if you can go back if you're a 3rd round pick right now or a 4th round pick and you have the ability to go back, you should. Like, you're going to go make more money in college than you will on your rookie deal to go back for one more year and maybe improve your draft stock. Like, why wouldn't you do that? And so I think part of it is the success of some of these guys that have had experience. People have less patience for developing guys in the NFL. And I just think in general, the draft pool is going to get older, whether NFL teams like it or not, because NIL is going to make it that way.
We only had, I think someone said this, and this was pending Ohio State, Notre Dame, who kind of has a little bit of an extended window because of the championship game. But I think this is the lowest number of like underclassmen we've had in quite some time. Like, I think like 70 underclassmen. Like a couple years ago, we were getting.
Last year was less, but it's still
okay.
half of what it was 4 or 5 years ago.
I remember like 4 or 5 years ago, we were having like 120, 150 guys declare early. And like a lot of those guys were going undrafted because they were just, chasing their dream. But like, there's only so many draft picks in a cycle. So yeah, I do agree. Like the prospect cycle is definitely different now. And NIL has obviously changed that. So.
We've talked some quarterback stuff here, and Alan, you brought this up to me. We actually had somebody tweeted us about this as well. Kevin Stifler, not sure if he's related to Steve at all, but he said topic for the afternoon drive, given the current quarterback unknown, what realistic quarterback prospects would the Steelers be interested in this draft? Even throughout some scenarios, day 1, potentially Milroe, day 2, Jackson Dart, day 3, UDFA, Hennigan. Like, where are we at with the quarterback class? And Alan, we've largely dismissed the idea of the Steelers drafting, at least early. We've really largely dismissed that and haven't had that conversation on here, but especially with having DB on here, the draft guy, I feel like it's worth the conversation worth having today.
Yeah. I mean, there was, I think, Phil Pony mentioned the other day that the Steelers seem to be a team that's interested in Milroe or like Milroe, or at least have some scouts that like Milroe. I've also heard that they are maybe higher than some on Milroe. I don't know. I think he's obviously quite a project as a player, as a quarterback. He's a great athlete. I just don't know that I have a lot of faith in the Steelers being the team to develop him. But I will say, and I think I said this too, is like, if the idea of this offense is you're going to change it all to let's say they're going to sign Justin Fields, and then they're going to like Greg Roman the offense, and like they're just going to run nothing but RPOs and read option and stuff like that, then I think drafting a guy like Jalen Milroe starts to make a little bit more sense. But I don't really think I expect them to do that. So I'm not thrilled about the idea. I think he will take a 1st round pick. I think he will go in the 1st round, and I don't think I would want to be that team to take him.
Oh boy. Yeah. I mean, it feels like we're just kind of doing it feels like a deja vu type situation from a couple years ago when they were in this situation and having to draft a quarterback. It's just not the quarterback class that you really want to have to be going back and, trying to find your guy. And I think it is tough. I think, with Milroe, he's really tough because I do think that over the first half of this past season, like there were signs of improvement. Jalen he's like 6'2", 225 pounds. So he's a pretty well-built kid. I mean, you look at the kid, I saw a video of him throwing just outside without a shirt on. It looks like he's, built like a superhero. I think the straight line speed is something that his game reminds me a lot of Justin. And like, that was the comparison I had for him like earlier in the season after watching him over the summer. The problem is, like, if you're bringing back Justin, like, why not just roll with him? Like, what's the point of drafting a less refined version of what Justin Fields was coming out of Ohio State? Like, why don't you just play Justin Fields? I just don't see the point in going that direction. I mean, he forces a lot of missed tackles as a runner. Like, there are games where, like, the Georgia game is a good example of like where he's up against all these like NFL quality athletes. And he's the best athlete on the field at the quarterback position. That's pretty rare. Like, he's going to go into the NFL as one of the best athletes we've ever seen at that position. He throws a fantastic deep ball. Like, I mean, he had a really good connection with Jermaine Burton last year at Alabama. He could do some things as a scrambler. I do think like the processing sped up a little bit this year. Like, he was getting the ball out a little bit quicker, but then like he still had just some horrendous games this year where he just looked completely out of place and like things fell apart for him. And he's just nowhere like where he needs to be, like in terms of operating within the pocket. And like that just tells me that he's still quite a bit away So yeah, he's a massive project. I mean, if you're going to take a guy in this class, I would prefer to, take the guy that at least has the tools to build around. Like he's got a strong arm. He can obviously run better than 99% of people we've ever seen play this position, but you're going to have to be really patient with him and try to devise some sort of simplified offense around him. To capitalize kind of on his rushing floor. I know like some other people have talked about like Jackson Dart and like Will Howard, I feel like is gaining some steam. I mean, I'm just of the opinion, like, I don't really care. Like if they want to take a shot at a quarterback in this class, then I guess you can do it. It just, to me, it's just, I don't really see a path here that really makes a ton of sense. I think drafting Milroe in the first round is really tough, is a tough sell just based on where he's at in his development. But if I could get him on day 2, like he would be the guy that I would want just because of the trades.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I was just saying, like Alan said, though, I wanted to turn this point back to DB because Alan said this. We had touched on this earlier in the week when we briefly talked about Milroe. This kind of goes back to the coaching staff. This is an independent thought, really, than just the idea of drafting Milroe and having to develop him. Who on this coaching staff do you look at and say, this is the guy that I want to put in charge of developing a guy like Jalen Milroe? I mean, you have Tom Arth and Artie Smith. Are we trusting them to get the best out of Jalen Milroe and develop, him as a quarterback and an offensive game plan? Or is it more about what Alan is saying with completely just switching the way that the offense would be operated if you are bringing a guy in like Milroe?
Yeah, I mean, either way, they're probably going to be doing that, right, with Justin, because like Justin's not going to run the offense that Art necessarily wanted to run or ran in Tennessee. Like, I think you're going to have to tweak the offense, and I do think that is part of like being an offensive coordinator, is like being able to tailor your system to like whoever's playing quarterback and get the most out of them. I think he tried to do that with Russ to a point down the stretch last season. I think you saw things fall apart up against better competition, just like how limited it felt at times. And I think there are some limitations like with Justin in there as well, barring further development. I think for me, the answer would be no. There aren't really a lot of there aren't a lot of, I'll say, like organizations that I look at and say like, oh, they're really good at developing quarterbacks. I just think in general, the NFL has a hard time developing quarterbacks. I think they have a hard time evaluating quarterbacks. Because you look at like the success stories, even from guys like drafted outside like the top 10, and like they're really circumstantial. Like there's a lot of different variables there that you can kind of point to. Like I even think of like I was having a conversation with someone during the games last weekend about Jalen Hurts, and they were sitting there saying like, Jalen is clearly like a starting caliber player. And like, there are times where he looks like a really good player, but like, do you think he would have been able to be this type of player at Pittsburgh? And like, my answer was like very flatly, no. Like Jalen is still to this day, like 5 years after being drafted, has his terrible pocket presence. It just really doesn't matter because he's playing with the best offense in the NFL. So it's like some of that circumstantial in their surroundings. And I don't necessarily think that like, Sirianni or like that Kellen Moore is like these like great wonder kids of offensive architecture or anything like that. It just a lot of, I don't know, evaluating quarterbacks is really, really hard. So I don't know. It would be, I think it would be in their best option to like bypass this season and just try to get to next year and try to take another big swing.
But to that point though, don't you think that there needs to be somebody else on the staff that at least has a track record of developing a quarterback before you take that shot on a quarterback, if it is going to be in 26?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just all these kind of points kind of just lead back to me about like just how the organization's ran in general, because you have a defensive head coach who's struggled to bring in like offensive play callers. So to me, there's not a lot of faith that the offense is going to get really turned around until they get that spot right. And even if you do get that spot right, as like other teams around the league have like find out all the time, it's like even if you get the the offensive coordinator right or the quarterback coach right, those guys are out of there. So it's really tough. So even like Tampa Bay is like a good example of like, I look around at the teams that have fielded really good offenses without like superstar quarterbacks. Like Tampa Bay would be a good example, but they got 1 year of Liam Cohen and then like he basically ghosts them and they'll go take a head coaching job. You know what I'm saying? And then it's like Ben Johnson probably could have, like, even though like they've built that thing so well, it's way beyond just like what he's turned Jared Goff into. But Ben Johnson, same thing, like really good coordinator, could have left probably 2 years ago, but didn't, stayed around. So it's just tough. Like when you have a defensive minded head coach, getting the play caller right, getting the quarterback right, I just think it makes it harder than when you have like, maybe a McVay or a Shanahan who's going to elevate basically whoever's back there in the pocket.
Yeah, I think if you want to talk about elevating quarterback play, I mean, I think that Shanahan is probably the place you start. Look what he's done with Brock Purdy, and I'm very interested to see where that goes in the future as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I trust the Steelers to develop a project quarterback successfully. But like DB saying, I probably don't trust like 3/4 of the NFL teams to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't trust any of them with like defensive head coaches, probably. It's just sort of the way it is. I think the Steelers are going to need kind of a ready-made thing in terms of the quarterback position, whether that comes through a free agency or a trade, or whether that just becomes from drafting someone who is already pretty well put together. I think sort of like their decision to draft Kenny Pickett over Malik Willis was kind of an acknowledgement of that they preferred, like, there was a lot of arguments about who was the better draft pick in that class, but there was no question as to which one needed less work to do. That was Kenny Pickett. Like, so if you're out there like yourself drafting the lower ceiling ready-made guy, you're kind of saying to everyone, that's not my thing. Like, not everybody can drive the car that needs constant maintenance. Some people just need to have a Honda Civic because every time you turn the key, it starts. Like, that's where the Steelers coaching staff is with the quarterback position, I feel like. And I don't think that's going to change. And I don't think that in itself is necessarily like the world's most damning thing to say about a coaching staff. There's lots of them out there.
Yeah, I just think a lot of it's just like really like it sucks to acknowledge, because I think as like analysts or as coaches, as organizations, like you always want to feel like you have all the answers, right? Like you can look at all these trends about what works in the NFL, like what doesn't, but like at the end of the day, like the quarterback stuff is like a complete crapshoot, man. Like it's just it's a roulette thing. Like you just spin the wheel and it just turns whatever it turns. And you would like to think you're going to get lucky, like Alan said, like maybe you do, because it doesn't necessarily mean you like take the first quarterback off the board and get that type of thing. For me, it's like, what does the organization like value in like quarterbacks in general? Like if you look at the guys that they brought in a lot of different kind of types of quarterbacks, even dating back to like the Mason Rudolph pick. Remember, they like said that they had a first round grade on him, whatever. You look at Kenny Pickett, you look at Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. What are the similarities? I don't know. Like, I would just love to know what their vision for this offense is, assuming like Arthur Smith's going to be in the picture, right? Because we know Steelers don't fire coordinators. They kind of let them play out their contracts. Let's just assume that Art's going to be here for this year and probably next year as well. Like when they're meeting, I would just love to know like what Arthur Smith or what they would like for this next quarterback to be able to do. Is that Justin? And if it's Justin, like that's fine. But like, how are we going to build this thing out to where, Justin does have like some similarities to like a guy like Jalen Hurts, like doesn't throw over the middle of the field, is a plus runner. He gives you an advantage in the numbers game when you want to run the football, throws the deep ball outside the numbers, not the quickest processor you've ever seen in the world by any stretch of the imagination. But like we see, like it's difficult to make those things work when quarterbacks necessarily can't be propped up by like play action or things like that, because like Justin even struggled like taking snaps under center last year. So it's like, I don't know what that looks like. I think the easiest answer in the short term is, hey, let's build the absolute best roster we possibly can, infuse a ton of talent, because we know we don't have enough of it on offense right now. We need to go get a real difference maker at receiver. We need to continue to invest in the offensive line. We've got to run the football better. And then hopefully, like, you're in a position to where you could take a big swing on a quarterback maybe next year while you've got a better ecosystem for them to operate in. Because even as much as like Russ struggled down the stretch, and I would be firmly against bringing him back to Pittsburgh, like you can't look at the environment that he was operating in with a team that can't run the ball and has one real NFL wide receiver and say that like, hey, we can just throw any quarterback into this environment and they're going to succeed. That's just not true.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hurts one of three quarterbacks to have a longer time to throw than Justin Fields this year. So they're very similar players in that regard.
Hybrid God has something that maybe can help out with Justin Fields, assuming he comes back. And we've had like 4 people mention this. I think it's because it's like just surfaced on social media about Jaden Daniels doing the QB VR training stuff. Derek, do you know anything about this or like what the benefits of it could be? Because Jaden Daniels, I know there's like that long thread that was put out on Twitter regarding him getting involved in this. I don't know if this is going to start a trend with younger quarterbacks that come in, or maybe even guys that are already in the league, just curious what it did. What's your take on this if you know anything about it?
Yeah, so I actually sent it to my buddy of mine. Recently, he actually coaches quarterbacks, and I just asked him about what he thought about it, and he was like, I've heard, some of the big programs have it now. Basically, what he's referring to is like LSU like started doing like VR training with Jaden. The whole thing about it is like I think like all the defensive players like in the virtual reality like environment like basically move at like I think he said 1.75 times speed. So it basically gets you to process information quicker than you would in real life. So what that does is like once you actually get out there and do things like in a practice setting, everything like feels slower. Now, I don't know of like other quarterbacks that have done it. I did read some of the videos about like I looked at some of like the videos that they showed of like what it looks like from his perspective, just going through and like looking at coverages. I do think it has some benefits just because where the NFL is right now in terms of and like where they're really headed is you're getting a lot of these defenses that are kind of there's 2 kind of schools of thought. It's everything looks the same pre-snap and then you shift after the snap, or everything looks different pre-snap and they shift into stuff after the snap. So the idea is like it puts more on the quarterback's plate, especially if you're having to play from shotgun because you have to look, your eyes have to come down to catch the ball. So you think about your eyes have to come down to catch the ball, and then when you come back up, the safeties have rotated and they're in different positions than they were pre-snap. So it just means that, by the time that's happened, your eyes come back up. You've got 2.5 seconds to basically process where the ball needs to go. Now, if you work on that at 1.75 speed, it's just training your eyes to like see things quicker and process that information quicker. So, I mean, again, I don't know that you can maybe Jaden's just so special and has always been like, this has just been his destiny. It seems he's been a real like advocate or proponent of using this technology. I would like to see other guys use it just to see if like we can get a bigger sample size. Like maybe this is like the next greatest tech hack in the world. And like, this is how we get to the next great revolution of quarterback play. I don't know. I would be interested to see it happen though. Because I do think it makes a lot of sense in terms of, training quarterbacks' eyes. Cause that's one of the things that you'll hear guys talk about a lot when they get to the NFL is just the speed of the game is a lot quicker because you're going up against the world's best athletes. You're going up against the world's best coaches. Everything happens faster. And that's why, like, when you see quarterbacks and we talk about quarterbacks like Jalen Milroe, even Jackson Dart, who I think is like a fan favorite right now, guys that process things and process information slow. So if you're a tick slow in college, imagine what that's going to be at the NFL level. And that's why you see young quarterbacks struggle so much. With Jaden, the thing that impresses me the most beyond like, like all the stuff he's been able to do, the accolades, things like that, is just like how poised he seems. And again, that can kind of potentially be linked back to the VR just because, being poised in big moments comes back to preparation. And I think that Jaden looked really prepared all season long, regardless of what defensive coordinators threw at him. And yeah, I think it's cool. I would like to see more information on it, more players use it to get a bigger sample size.
The Steelers have done something sort of similar in the past. They tried it with Ben Roethlisberger. They tried it again with Kenny Pickett, where they would just put a camera on the quarterback's helmet so that instead of when you're looking at the film and you're kind of looking at the top-down view, they would actually be able to review kind of like their actions from their own eyes, like, and sort of be able to separate what they should have been, like what was open versus what they possibly could have seen in terms of like training your eyes and where you needed to look and that kind of thing. Because sometimes when the quarterback doesn't see something, it's because they read it wrong. Sometimes when the quarterback doesn't see something, he didn't look like, and so it doesn't matter how you like. I think the point here is that different people need different things. I'm not going to say that like, oh, if you just gave every quarterback in the NFL VR, like they would all be better. Like I kind of doubt it. there are definitely some players that need the kind of eye training to learn where to look, when to look, how to look for defenders while doing the same thing that Derek's talking about, while, getting your pre-snap, offense set up, whether it's a motion or a shift, checking the offensive line protection, looking down for the ball and all that. You still got to watch what the safeties are doing and how they're doing it. And so, yeah, it's difficult to train your eyes that way. Some guys need that help. Some guys just don't go through their progressions. So it doesn't, you get there with a live rush and you kind of panic. It doesn't really matter, whether you've done it in VR or not. So I think it just depends on the player. Some guys it'll probably help. Some guys probably would have no help for it whatsoever. I think it just depends on what specific thing is causing someone's struggles and how you would want to attack them. And I definitely think it could be a specific tool. I don't think it's this thing that's just going to make every quarterback better. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Jaden Daniels, though, special season as a number 2 overall pick. The previous year's number 2 overall pick, CJ Stroud, looking for a new offensive coordinator. Not himself looking for a new offensive coordinator, but
maybe
he will have a new offensive coordinator.
Maybe himself. Maybe.
Maybe he does have that type of pull already. Anyways, Bobby Slowik done with the Houston Texans after just 2 seasons, and after one, it seemed like there's going to be a hot head coaching commodity and potentially going to be one and done in Houston. Obviously, the time in San Francisco leading him to Houston, like he was going to be a hot young name to watch. And now he's done in Houston after just 2 seasons. What do we make of this? And of course, because this is a Steelers show, we got to talk about potentially, say he were to not land an OC job somewhere for whatever reason, would a guy like this make sense to add to the offensive staff?
Yeah, I was a little surprised by this. Not because their offense was good this year, because it wasn't, but because they had a bunch of injuries and it was pretty good last year. And usually coaches get that level of grace. It's pretty unusual to see a coordinator fired 2 years in when his first year was pretty good, even if the second year is miserable, but especially when the second year is miserable and most of his playmakers were hurt. I'm interested to see which direction Houston goes with this. But in terms of could Bobby Slowik be a guy to help the Steelers? Yeah, I think so. I think anytime you're tapping into that Shanahan tree, I think that's probably a good thing. I don't know that I would sign up for him to be somebody's offensive coordinator right away, given the fact that he didn't get this grace. It seems like to me there's more to the story we haven't heard, basically, is what I'm trying to kind of dance around here, because this is not usually the way this goes down. So I'm interested to see what eventually comes out about why D'Amico Ryan's decided you need to move on from him right now. But in terms of pass game coordinator or something like that, sure. I mean, take a flyer on him. DB, I'm
also before DB goes, I saw a lot of people saying Clint Kubiak will be the Texans coordinator in 48 hours. We'll see if that comes to fruition.
I would like that. I would like that for the Texans. Yeah, I mean, I think Slowik was a guy, full disclosure, I was excited about Slowik when he got the job. Anytime one of these Shanahan or McVay acolytes, take a job, it's all right, how are they going to build on? Because we've seen success with those guys, Kevin O'Connell's turned into one of the best head coaches in the NFL. But I mean, I honestly think Slowik did a pretty poor job, injuries notwithstanding, to the things that they suffered. Totally understand, you lose a couple receivers for sure. Less than ideal. But I just look at it to me, it's a major red flag that goes up when all of your best players get worse. CJ Stroud got worse this year. Never looked like the player that we saw last year. Even veteran guys they had on the offensive line, Shaq Mason, Laramie Tunsil, those guys did not look like their normal selves. I think that's usually an indictment of the environment. The thing with Slowik is I think he was just really stubborn as a play caller and really struggled to sequence plays, which is something that I think first time play callers always, not always, but typically struggle with. He was really stubborn in terms of his just propensity to run the ball on first and second down, even though the Texans were terrible. The Texans were 31st in the NFL in early down rushing success rate, but they did it all the time. So it's consistently what it was doing is putting CJ Stroud into third and long situations over the past 2 years. I mean, in 2023, that worked because like Stroud was 6th in EPA per play, or total EPA generated on third down, like third and long scenarios. He was basically up there with like Patrick Mahomes. Like Patrick Mahomes, like superpower is like how efficient he is about converting first downs and like third and long situations. Stroud was like special, not just for a rookie, but like special as a rookie in like those scenarios. And like we kind of saw the burden that put on him like throughout this season, where he was like consistently put behind the chains in a system that really wasn't giving him enough like easy buttons. And like things just fell apart for him. It seemed like it was too much. Like he regressed as a player. But I really just like look at it from like the Texans got absolutely obliterated every single week, just in terms of like not understanding basic pass protection rules. Like there was a play in the playoff game that I tweeted out where it's like they basically have I think it's like a 6-man mugged up front. So you got a guy in every single gap and they let a guy come right at the middle. And it's like rule number 1 of pass protection at any level is like, you do not let free runners come up the A and the B gap. You just don't. It does not happen. If you have somebody that's a free runner, want them coming off the edge because it's easier for the quarterback to, deal with that guy, and he's further away. And that stuff was like that all season. They couldn't pick up any stunts. They got absolutely wrecked in the pocket every single week. And it was more than just like a talent thing. Like, hey, we just have a bunch of scrubs up there. We're just losing one-on-ones. That wasn't what this was. So their inability to kind of like figure out answers on the fly was kind of a signal to me that DeMeco would probably like want to go a different direction, because I think DeMeco and that franchise probably already realizes that they've got a pretty special quarterback and they want to try to maximize that rookie window. So it wasn't surprising to me that they moved on from him, just based on like, I think some of the ways that they're like 15th, I think, in like EPA per play last year. Like they were average offense who clearly overachieved from like what preseason expectations were. But like, I think some of the ways that they overachieved last year were just like really unsustainable. And it was really just Stroud being a superhuman rather than like good offense, if I would say.
And I know that obviously injuries went into that, but you could argue like at least going into the season from a roster perspective, they should have been better. Joe Mixon as a back. They brought in Stephon Diggs, and it's not like they were lighting the world on fire offensively before those guys got hurt. So
all offseason about how loaded they were at wide receiver. And then the Steelers scored more points than them with nobody at wide receiver. Like, and
crazy.
I don't think anybody would prefer Russell Wilson to CJ Stroud at this point in their respective careers. So I guess in some ways I get it.
I don't know. Some of our comments.
I think it is an unusual. Is not usually the way you see that move go down. I'm a little surprised by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, before we get out of here, I have a gripe to pick with the PFWA. Joe Burrow named comeback player of the year.
As a member of the PFWA, I may or may not defend the good name of the organization.
Well, it's all to do Joe Burrow comeback player for the PFWA. Which you put out that you voted for Cam Hayward anyway. So, my gripe is not towards you, but just the PFWA as a general has to take a hit here from Zach Smith.
All right. I think we'll wear that. I disagree with the consensus of our organization, so I'm not sure I should speak for it. But I mean, Joe Burrow had a great year. In fact, I voted for him for Offensive Player of the Year. So like I'm not like putting down Joe Burrow. I just think Joe Burrow is a young guy in his prime who had a non-career threatening injury and came back and played really well after it. Like, I don't know, that to me, that doesn't necessarily meet the standard of what I expect when I'm talking about that award. Like usually I feel like it should be someone who in some way beat some odds or did something that we were not expecting. I don't think that anybody is surprised by Joe Burrow, again, being one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Meanwhile, probably 50% of the Steelers fan base is surprised that Cam Hayward was even good, let alone great. 50% of the
Steelers fan base wanted to run him out of town.
Yeah. DB, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I don't think anyone advocated more for like Defensive Player of the Year love than for Cam Hayward than I did. I thought he's the best player on the Steelers this season. I know things kind of trailed off for the defense over the last month or so of the season, but phenomenal year. I have honestly like no takes at all on the Comeback Player of the Year. I have no idea like what the award even means, to be honest with you. Like it just seems like we just kind of pick and choose like what the criteria is. Like sometimes it's Alex Smith coming back from a crazy injury. Sometimes it's just like whatever like player, had a really nice bounce back season. I really don't know. So I don't have any strong feelings other than like, I think it's just kind of a pointless award, to be honest with you, but
unbelievable. Well, the AP, like
something that I would like to get off the chest. So I wrote today for the site that Quinshon Judkins committed to, or has gone out for the draft. Ohio State running back, who I believe the Steelers will absolutely be interested in, probably on day 2. Judkins was a junior, one of those guys, underclassmen we talked about. So he, it was news that he came out. This trend, though, of like players who have exhausted their college eligibility making a big deal out of declaring for the draft really annoys me. And I don't know why. It's a very old man yells at cloud thing, and I recognize that. But like, yeah, of course you're going into the draft. You've graduated and you can't go back to college. There's nowhere else to go. Like, they call it special eligibility for those underclassmen. You don't need to do anything. You are automatically in the draft. Like, you don't have to take any other step. They'll draft you whether you want to be drafted or not. It doesn't, you're not doing anything. I don't know why it bothers me, but it does.
Have you seen those announcements where they're like kind of being funny about like, I'm out of eligibility, it's time for me to go get a job?
No, I like it more the players that are not going.
Yes. You want to be funny about it? That's fine. I saw the one guy like he said he's entering the transfer portal to LinkedIn or something like that. Like, okay, I'm good with that. But this like big announcement about you going pro, I'm like, yeah, dude, you played your 4 years of college, of course. Unless you're retiring, that's the only other option here. I don't know why.
Transferring.
I don't know why it bothers me, but it does.
I haven't seen a commercial for them in a while. I'm transferred to Triangle Tech. Anyways, Tech, before we get
with the NIL, really could have something going.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, could be special. Going to run.
There you go.
Make it hot. DB, before we get out of here, tell the people they can find you.
At Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube. You can find all my written work at SteelersNow.com.
SteelersNow.com and from SteelersNow.com. Alan, tell the people they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. PGH Steelers Now is the site's account, SteelersNow.com. Sign up for SN Plus, get all the best stuff from me and DB, and ad free, which is just the only way to read the site.
Game changer.
The only way.
Game changer. If this was my podcast around the 412, I would have played the Game Changers ad that we have for one of our sponsors right there. I would have put that in by saying that. But anyways, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, hit us in the comments, keep the questions coming. We're going to need them throughout the duration of the offseason. We still got a long time to go. Alan's going to be next few weeks are going to start ramping up. Get busy. We're going to see Alan on the road again. So excited for that. If you're listening somewhere else, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. I'm going to read those reviews as they come in. Of course, we don't want to leave the audio people hanging. They're just as important as the YouTube viewers. So be sure to do that. And I guess, find us on TikTok too. Eventually, I'm assuming that app will come back into the App Store at some point. If you deleted it off your phone like me, the struggle that I'm dealing with. But anyways, find me everywhere. Zachary Smith, PGH, Round Saunders, Derrick Bell, myself. Thanks for jumping in and taking another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.